All right, guys, welcome back to the Run Through Trails podcast. Today we've got our fourth athlete interview episode, and we're lucky to be joined by the amazing Luke Grenfell-Shaw. Luke is a Brooks athlete. He's just finished producing the documentary film A Life in Tandem and is currently working on his book, Second Life. We're going to dig into all that stuff. Luke's got an incredible story. Lots of things to share with us, as well as being a top-level professional athlete. He's done a lot and been through a lot. So really looking forward to digging into all of that. Luke, thanks so much for joining us. How are you today?
Yeah, well, James, Lewis, thanks very much for the opportunity. It's great to be here. And I'm doing well. I'm in Kazakhstan right now. I stay with some very good friends in their flat, and they have two cats. And one of the cats is sitting right next to me, looking intently at the laptop screen. So I think I've got my companion for this interview. And yeah, Spartak will be keeping an eye on anything that I'm saying.
Wonderful. Perfect. I mean, it's interesting. It's a unique spot for a training camp. So we're definitely going to dig into the background story behind that. And obviously, as always, joined by my regular co-host, Lewis Moses. How are you doing, Lewis?
I'm good. Thank you, James. Yeah, and before we came on, obviously I was saying to Luke, it's good to finally put a face in person to the name. Luke and I have many mutual connections, and I guess the cancer world kind of connects us all in some strange way, whether that's unfortunately or fortunately, but I always find a lot of positive stories come out of unfortunate situations, and thankfully we're joined by somebody who has a very, very inspiring story, and I'm very excited to go through that conversation with Luke. I think it's going to be a lot different to the other athlete stories we've done. This is very much going to be behind the life of the athlete rather than just the racing, but I think that's a really good story to be told. So excited for this one, looking forward to it.
All right, perfect. Well, let's get things started off. Luke, I think best place to start is the start. How did you get into running initially? Were you a sporty kid? Where did you grow up? Like, what was your life like as a child?
Yeah, so I grew up in Bristol, and I think the way I got into running, and I think it really paved the way for trail running much later, not that I was really aware of it at the time, was that as a family, we went orienteering. And so, our Sunday mornings would be spent sort of going to some forest, like Forest of Dean, and spending half an hour running my way through a forest, getting lost, getting scratched by brambles. And then my brother and I, John, we would sort of wait in the car, seemingly forever for mum and dad to finish their runs. And I just remember sort of being like very damp and eating sort of limp sandwiches in the car after these races. And, it wasn't something I absolutely fell in love with, to be honest, at that time. But I now really see how that laid the groundwork, not only for running, but for loving being outdoors. And so I have a lot to thank my parents for, ultimately.
So were they were into orienteering originally? Because we just spoke to Chris Jones on the last podcast. Obviously, competed in at like a world-class level in orienteering. It's not something I was even aware of growing up. How did you find your way into that?
I don't really know. It certainly wasn't the cool answer to have at school. Like everyone else was like, yeah, play football, maybe do some cricket or something. And here I was going, oh yeah, I did orienteering at the weekend. And everyone's like, what on earth is that? And
right.
So I never really felt like one of the cool kids. Nothing's changed there. But my mum's mum, my mum's parents, they got into orienteering for some random reason, I guess, in like the 80s or something. And then, so my mum did it as a child growing up, and I suppose never stopped. And when she had a family, she carried on that same tradition.
I think one thing that's fascinating about these conversations with people who eventually do find trails and mountains, they seem to have a couple of connections. One of those connections being the love of outdoors, and whether it's from a younger age or getting into it as they get a little bit older, and whether it is orienteering like Chris and yourself, Luke, or we spoke to John Alban, who's into adventure racing when he was younger, and even spoke about rollerblade hockey, which something I was into, which I couldn't believe the connection was there. But maybe it's a generational thing about spending time outdoors, but do you feel like that helped you when you certainly came towards the trails, those hours spent outside, that love of nature and appreciation for where you are?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. And yeah, that's a key part of it. And I think the love of nature I have now was built on that childhood. But I think it's more than that. I think the ability, bluntly, to sort of suffer also was developed in those younger years, not through anything like particularly sort of crazy, but we did sort of family holidays. Like one year we cycled down a good chunk of the Rhone Valley, from the source to Geneva. And I just remember it being so tough. I mean, like ridiculously tough. I think I was like 10 or 11. And I think the longest day we did was about 43 miles or something like that. So, quite far, but nothing crazy. But honestly, I don't have like amazingly positive memories of that of that holiday, because it just felt like so much difficult time in the saddle. I think my favorite day was we visited like a water park in Brigabad, and the one day that we weren't cycling was my favorite day, which probably says it all. But I think it really paved the way for later on just sort of being around other people, and they sort of found it difficult after an hour, and I was like, oh, I'm used to going, for a long, long time.
Yeah, there's definitely something to that. Like me and my wife talk quite a lot. We've got a 3-year-old daughter, and we talk quite a lot about how we can expose her to adversity to help her develop character and kind of be a well-rounded, strong person, because that's something that both of us have kind of valued a lot through life. But do it in a way where, just do it in a constructive way. And I think the best way to do that is through like challenging outdoor experiences. That's how I've always done it. Like big days ski touring, long days hiking, like going and playing rugby every weekend all through the winter, getting battered by people twice your size, and just kind of learning that to have fun even when things are tough. So, I mean, the other side of that, it sounds like for you probably led a little bit into this, I don't know, a bit of a taste for adventure, a bit of a want to travel the world, because obviously we'll get onto your bike journey, well, the big bike journey, a bit later in the chat. But obviously right now you're also in Kazakhstan, you're traveling the world doing these trail races. You've obviously been bitten by the travel bug. Did that kind of also come from your parents and from some of these trips that you did as a kid?
I wouldn't say so, especially. It actually came from once I turned 18, and I took a year out between school and going to university. And I ended up working in several different countries. So I guess in contrast to some gap years where people spend, 6 months in the UK earning a lot of money, I didn't really sort of do like a Southeast Asia sort of travel route where I was on holiday for, 4 months or something. But basically, I ended up working in Nigeria. I worked out in the Middle East. I spent some time teaching in Russia, working on a buffalo farm in Ukraine. And I finished off with a big cycle trip right the way from Santiago de Compostela to Nice, and then got the flight up to Newcastle. And then the next day started my first day at Durham Uni. So that was really when the travel bug started, when I sort of started discovering the world on my own terms, not with my parents. We were lucky to travel to Europe, and we went skiing, but we didn't really ever go beyond Europe. And so for me, I think that made it all the more exciting that I was discovering this on my own terms, and also perhaps differentiating myself from my parents, which is of course what every teenager loves to do. And so perhaps it sort of tied in with that.
Well, what I love about that, Luke, is some amazing places you visited, and I'd say quite different to the people that you usually speak to who go traveling as well. The countries that you mentioned there aren't sort of the normal routes that people take when they travel the world. I hear people going to Australia and those sort of places, where you mentioned like Russia and Ukraine, obviously very, very politically present at the moment, but also brilliant places to visit and those cool experiences. But you ended up in the best place ever, which is in the northeast of England, because obviously that attracts people up at Durham. So that's where you were based at university. And I believe, you were more of I may have this wrong, Luke, but from what I've seen from your socials and your background, you were more of a triathlete at that point, were you? Or did you get into triathlon at that point?
Yeah, so in my late teens, so through my teens, I got into cross country running and road races. I always wanted to be really, really good. And I had friends who, represented England or GB at their age group best. And, for whatever reason, I never really seemed to have quite the gears to do that over 5K, 10K, or whatever. I was good, but I wasn't fantastic. And when I had the opportunity, one of my school teachers persuaded me to buy a road bike, and that really was my way into triathlon. And I found that although I wasn't the best runner, I could put a pretty good run and cycle and run together, and that kind of put me a bit further up and a bit closer to the the top of the the UK rankings, I suppose. And so Spartak is coming across. We've got my sensor involved.
As your companion.
Just wandered across. And yeah, so that's where I started to think, I can get to quite a high level. But all through that period, I was also learning how to train. I remember, I guess when I was like quite late on, like 17 years old, thinking, I wanted to do really well at the English cross country champs. And when I look back, probably the people who were winning that were doing like 80 to 100-mile weeks. I wouldn't be surprised, the top runners at that kind of age, and I thought going for like an 8K run was like a good training run, and I just didn't have my head screwed on of like what was really required to reach those high levels. But yes, in answer to your question, Lewis, at Durham, I started doing a lot of triathlon. And I'd always planned to go into Ironman, and sort of my dream was to be a professional Ironman triathlete.
Cool. And so when you left university, was that something you actively pursued, or what was the next chapter of the story? Were you still taking part in triathlon competition post-university, or?
Yeah, I sort of went by the logic, which has since been proved quite wrong by some of the star Ironman triathletes of today. But I always assumed that you'd be best at iron distance triathlons in your late 20s or your 30s. So I graduated from uni. I was spending a year out in Russia because I studied Russian at school, and it was kind of my dream to speak fluent Russian. So that took me out to Siberia. And I was expecting, in a few more years to really give a good tilt at being a pro Ironman triathlete. And then life got in the way. One of my old school teachers said, life is what happens when you're making plans. And I'd made plans, and life had totally different ideas of what should happen next.
So when you were out traveling, when you were in Siberia, kind of pursuing this dream of speaking fluent Russian, and you were planning on also simultaneously becoming a professional triathlete, how seriously were you training at that point? Did you kind of realize the amount of hours that were involved? Because if you were doing 8K jogs at uni, trying to win cross-country champs, I'm sure the people you were probably competing against in Ironman were doing 30-hour weeks. Were you like stringing together consistent training? Did you have the facilities you needed? Were you looking at coaching at all or anything like that? Or you just kind of like stringing it together?
Yeah, so at university, my training had definitely stepped up a level, and I was probably training, still not crazy hours, but somewhere between 10 and 20 hours, alongside a degree, alongside other, activities and stuff. And I've always enjoyed having multiple things going on in my life. But, I was going for hard cycles in the Pennines with the cycle club. I was one of the top runners in the athletics club, at least over the longer distances. So I was beginning to train pretty hard, still not those crazy hours that you're referring to. When I went out to Russia, I actually did my first ever trail race out in Siberia in the Ural Mountains. It was a 50K. And I think, but my preparation for that, I was doing some longer runs. I'd done some good like tempo threshold stuff. And I think before that, I did a sort of 2.5 hour run. And I think maybe an hour of that was at a good sort of tempo threshold pace in the middle. And, I rocked up to that race, 50 kilometers, having no idea what I was doing. I mean, I had one of those old camelbacks that should have, sort of the
Nice.
platypus and the tube. And in that bag, I would put a mixture of squash and coffee. And I'd had 2 chocolate bars with me, like sort of big 100-gram chocolate bars, and that was my food. And I had my old pair of trainers that I'd had for been wearing for probably the last 6 months. Like that was my kit. I didn't know any better. But for me, that race was a total revelation, because I was like, wow, this is so amazing. You're running in the forest. We're going through streams, because up to that point, I'd only really raced 10K, and that intensity had never suited me. And then this, 50K race, it was the pace was that much lower, and it felt that much more relaxed. And I was like, oh, this is so good. And I ended up, to my surprise, being alongside the lead runner. And we ran the entire 50 kilometers together. And the last 20 kilometers was an absolute slugfest. I mean, we were both dead, and we both wouldn't give up. I've never felt my legs screaming like that. And I mean, the last 20K, I was like in agony. And somehow we just kept going. I think it's because I was young, and I'm so young, but yeah, I was even younger at that point, and just didn't know any better. And this guy ended up out sprinting me on the finishing straight. And I found out afterwards he'd done a 63 half marathon and represented Russia. So he was, a much better person than I had any right to be running with. And the next day I was just utterly broken. Like I couldn't walk downstairs. I had to sort of slip down on my bum.
I absolutely love that. I think this is what I love about trails. Is I say a lot to James, I say a lot to Gemma, I say a lot to the people I coach. I just feel like it's a leveler. I feel like it brings different athletes who have different qualities to a level playing field, usually because the people who are faster don't have as good nutrition. But on this case, Luke, I think he probably had better nutrition than you as well. It would have been hard not to. But at the same time, it was probably that sheer grit, determination, and appreciation for what you're doing, and the enjoyment factor, right, of going in the mountains and enjoying it. I picked up on something there. You said that obviously at this point in your life, things are going well. You're enjoying what you're doing. Triathlon's going well. You've found trail running, probably found something you're pretty good at quite naturally. But it sounds like you had things mapped out, or you thought you had things mapped out, and then things started to change quite drastically.
Yeah. So yeah, you pick up on it, Lewis. And it's funny because so at this point, this trail race, this is like May 2018. I've just turned 24. I'm like, in pretty much some of the best shape I've ever been in, at least in this longer distance. I'm certainly like the fittest and healthiest person of all my friends. But at that time, I'd had like one thing that was kind of just a bit annoying. I'd had this like aching left shoulder. And I don't know, as an athlete, you kind of ignore these aches, but this one hadn't gone away. It'd been like quite a few months. And I remember on the bus journey over to this race, it was like this 8-hour bus journey. And I remember I couldn't really lean back against the chair, like the seat, because it was like just making my shoulder ache too much. But I didn't really think too much about it. I could run fine. I had a great race. And about a month later, best part of a month later, that ache still hadn't gone away. And my shoulder was really uncomfortable by this point. I couldn't run without having to sort of like roll it off every few hundred meters, every minute or so, just because it was, just aching. So I ended up going to the nurse at the school that I was working at. And I was like, look, it's probably nothing, but like this ache in my shoulder just hasn't gone away. So can you have a look at it? And she tells me to like turn round. And then she says, Bоже moj. Means, oh my God. And that was the first time I realized that this was something seriously wrong with me. And, it probably just wasn't an aching shoulder. It was something much worse than that. And then things happened very, very quickly. I kind of called my mum. My mum's a doctor. She kind of suddenly sort of was like, oh, this is really serious. I'd sort of said before that it was something's happening, but for some reason, like the wall was lifted from our eyes. And I went back to the UK within a couple of days. I had tests done. And then, the long story short is that about 3 weeks, but probably about a month after that race, something like that, the doctors told me I had cancer. It was already stage 4, so that there's basically a huge tumor now the size of a pineapple beneath my left shoulder blade, which had caused all the aching because it literally shifted the bones round, or pushed the shoulder blade off my back. Wow. And it had spread to my lungs. So I had quite a few lung metastases in my lungs, and it was basically a very rare, serious cancer that the doctors said you're probably not going to ever recover from. So that's what happened at 24.
Wow. Well, firstly, thanks for sharing it and being so open, Luke. I can imagine, and I can relate to it in some ways because there's scarily similarities to this story. My wife, Gemma, who you know really well and founded Move charity at the time, now Move Against Cancer, who you raised a shed load of money for, which we will be forever grateful for, which we'll come on to, I'm sure, with the bike from Bristol to Beijing. And that came after, obviously, your diagnosis. But Gemma was also diagnosed at 24, and it was from a lump, but this one was in her neck, Burkitt's lymphoma. And similar, it's actually, quite interesting to hear how we do ignore these things when they first come around, and I'll be okay, and then maybe signs become a little bit more worrying, and then it's almost as you described, you have the wool pulled from over the eyes, and then you see it so clearly, and it seems so obvious when you actually get told, but it's easy to ignore as well. And I think there's a message there to anybody who's listening, is don't ignore anything. You might think, I think sometimes we're so proud, or we think, oh, we're just being a little bit soft or whatever, but don't be. Go and get it checked out. Even if people say you're absolutely fine, then that's a good thing. They're saying you're fine and you can go away and you are fine. But in this case, it was very, very serious. And this was kind of, I guess I didn't know you at the time, but obviously I know the story now, and I know through Move Against Cancer what a inspirational story it is. But that first diagnosis was not good, from what I've heard from people. And how was that to hear it at your age, and what sort of things were going through your mind at that point?
Yeah, I mean, it's really difficult to articulate exactly what the doctors meant at this point, because it's so easy to take for granted that I'm now here 6 years later. But basically what the doctors said was like, we don't think the chemotherapy is going to work. Even if it does work, it buys you time. But like, not much more than months, or maybe like, I don't know, a year or something like that. They didn't give specifics, but that was the general impression. They didn't know exactly, but that was the general impression. And for me, and I think for a lot of people who hear that kind of news, what I really wanted was like some shred of hope. Obviously there are things like the denial and the immense distress that is caused, and like the fact that you're like, I'm gonna die, like I'm 24 years old, I'm gonna die, and I don't want to die, and this is like the worst possible thing imaginable, but beyond that, I wanted some hope, and I wanted to see someone else who had stage 4 cancer, who had gone on to live with like basically incurable stage 4 cancer. So like someone like Lance Armstrong, I was like, dude, Lance Armstrong's got it lucky. Like testicular cancer is curable. Like, I would take that any day. And I couldn't find anyone. And I suppose like part of what has motivated me since then, it's not the only thing, but it is a significant factor, is like to be a point of hope, because basically, I would have loved to have known at that time I was diagnosed that it was possible, there was a chance that I could go on to live for 5-6 more years and still be able to do amazing adventures and have a rich and fulfilling life. And that felt completely impossible, I suppose.
So in between that time of obviously getting this kind of terrifying news and your whole world changing, coming back to the UK to be with your family, seeing doctors, seeing specialists, whatever it was, what did the road to recovery look like? Because obviously you are here with us today. You did make it through. You have completely changed your life post this diagnosis. Like, how long was that process of going from the initial diagnosis to then actually seeing kind of a light at the end of the tunnel and realizing actually maybe I can actually kind of pull through this and have a proper life again?
So I think it's a really interesting question, James, and I think it really strikes at the heart of the uncertainty of my situation at that point, and to an extent still today. Like, there was no road to recovery. That was never ever how it was framed. It was framed as, this is incredibly serious cancer. We're going to give you some treatment. We'll see what happens. So I had chemotherapy. I had 6 rounds of chemo over about 5 months. I did the Bristol Half Marathon halfway through that. That's a separate story, but I think still one of my proudest ever races. I did that in 80 minutes, which I thought was pretty decent.
Just a bit.
With an asterisk on that 80 minutes.
Yeah. Drugs enhance. Ifosfamide and doxorubicin. Who knew what performance enhancing drugs you can have? Anyway, yeah, I mean, that was ridiculous. I had no hair, I had no eyebrows. My red blood cell count was low because of the chemo. I don't know, but I just ran as hard as I could and ran quite well. So then I had surgery on my left shoulder to remove that primary tumor. But the doctors were saying, why are you bothering? Some of my doctors were saying, why do you bother removing that left shoulder tumor? Because you still got those lung metastases, and they're still going to at some point come back. So like, it doesn't really necessarily buy you that much time. And I was like, this is ridiculous. If we can get rid of the primary tumor, then we're going to do it. Also, in that operation, I lost my left subscapularis muscle, which doesn't cause me any problems running, but it did put paid to my ability to swim. I wouldn't say really well, because I didn't swim really well before, but I think it would make it very difficult for me to swim at the kind of level required for an Ironman triathlon at a pro level, which is one reason why I didn't pursue pro triathlon post all of this. But who knows? Maybe that's a challenge for some other point. And then I had radiotherapy, and then it was a case of like, wait and see. Or it was basically a case of wait for the cancer to come back. I was having scans every 3 months, and the expectation was the cancer would come back at some point. And so, your question was a very, very, it was a great question to ask, because because it highlights just how differently we were thinking about all of this. It was like, okay, I've got 3 months, and probably my cancer will come back in 3 months' time. But it didn't come back in 3 months' time. So then I was like, okay, well, I was literally, and this might sound very familiar to you, Lewis, and, with Gemma, you're literally thinking about every 3 months. And like, when you have one scan and it comes back with good news, then you're like, okay, I've got 3 months to live. But literally, you're not thinking more than 3 months at a time. And it's really only been since I finished the cycle ride, and perhaps 5 years on from that initial diagnosis, I've dared to sort of start thinking slightly more longer term. What do I want to do over the next year, 2 years? But I'm still super aware that there aren't any guarantees with that. And I still have scans every 6 months, So it's still not something I take for granted.
I think a lot of people listening firstly won't be aware of that, Luke. The incredible footage from CCC last year when you were leading out the CCC, and people were typing in the live stream about your story, and people were becoming aware of that. And I said to Gemma, I said, "Oh, is Luke still living with cancer then?" And she said, "Well, technically, yeah. Who knows? It could return. That's what he's being told. It could come back, and you're living in that fear." But I think in relation to your point around Gemma's situation and your situation, I just remember very clearly of trying to control the things you can control in the present, and not trying to think too far ahead. And I think that's the stage you're describing. And it's weird how these things work. I'm actually delivering a session to our athletes tonight around this exact thing, about focusing 95% on the present and the process, and controlling what you can, and not getting too far ahead. And there's so much of that ironically, I've put into the presentation around that you can relate to racing as well, around not thinking about too long in the race. And maybe I was watching the CCC last year, and this is where I sometimes think, God, well, this is where my mind goes as a coach. I'm thinking, is Luke in a good position here? Because he literally doesn't give a shit. He's like, he's going for this. He's going for it. And do those experiences that he's been through help him in some ways? And that's just purely from a mindset perspective. I don't know what your thought process on that, but does it play a part? Because you're like, well, so what?
Yeah, I think in many ways, in the context of racing, yes, and in a much wider context, cancer, the fact that I'm still alive and it hasn't killed me yet, has been perhaps one of the greatest blessings of my life. It's taken my life in a totally different trajectory. It means that I back myself to do things that I would never have dared to before. I think it's totally changed my mindset. And in that race, last year at CCC, I was like, this is amazing. I'm winning this. I'm not winning it, but I'm leading the race. I've got a helicopter overhead. Like, this is the coolest fucking thing ever. And who cares if I blow up? I'm going to give it my best shot. And that's what I always try and do in these races is, I'm there to try and win. It certainly doesn't always happen, but that's what I like to that's my mindset. And I think the thing you were talking about, staying in the present, is super important, because particularly with these longer races, you can't rush any of it. You can't get, even if you've got the best shape possible, you're not going to get to the finish line of a 100K race in the mountains, before running 10 hours. So if you're 1 hour in, you can't somehow fast forward to 10 hours in. You've still got to do the next 9 hours. It doesn't matter what, you've got to live it and experience it. And I think that's where sort of embracing that, really relishing the opportunity to be in the mountains and really valuing every passing second. And that's what I always try and do. And I think the moment you're like, I don't want to be here, or I just want to rush through this, I think that's it's probably quite a dangerous place to get into in a race. You've got to embrace the fact that you're going to be there every single second of 10 hours or 12 hours or however long it is. But I mean, that's what you sign up to do. It's not a surprise. That's going to happen.
Yeah, it's one of those. I mean, there's so many things that feel like cliches, but they're cliches because they're true. And it's the process driven versus the results driven, even within a race, right? It's not just the process of the training and the planning and all that stuff that you need to enjoy to have a good performance. It's the process of execution, during the race, not just thinking about getting to the finish, thinking about, how do I feel? Have I had my gels? Am I on the right pacing? Yeah, it's like you say, you have to kind of enjoy and live in that moment. Otherwise, you can't just kind of fast forward straight to the end. But before we jump into the trail running, because I know we mentioned at the very start of the podcast, you've recently finished producing a documentary that you've been working on. And Lewis mentioned it before as well, this Bristol to Beijing tandem cycle, where you've raised a huge amount of awareness and a massive amount of money for people who are living with cancer. And just the whole story behind it is incredible. I wonder if you could just kind of talk us through how that came about, where the idea came from. I can see the whisperings of these bike rides down the Seine with your parents when you were a kid, coming back. And yeah, what was the impetus behind this as a project? And can you tell us a little bit about the experience and what you learned from doing it?
Yes. So despite the uncertainty of having scans every 3 months, I was acutely aware that I might not have long to live. And I was like, well, what do I want to do in this time? Maybe I've got 3 months, maybe I've got 6 months, maybe I've got a year. I didn't really ever expect to have more than a year, or perhaps a year and a half. So I was like, well, what am I going to do in this final year of my life? What is my dream? And having cancer is this amazing liberator, because there was no one who's going to come along and tell me, actually, you should start that job in the city. Or, why don't you do something more responsible with your time? And so when I sort of really, felt inside myself, and the kind of dream I'd had since I was a teenager was to cycle around the world. And I was like, right, that's what I want to do. I want to cycle around the world. There's no one to come along and say, oh, no, you should get a responsible job, and, sort of, you need to think about your pension pot. Obviously no one was going to be saying that. All my career prospects. I mean, why bother climbing the career ladder if you're going to be dead after the first rung? Doesn't seem much point. But my plan was I ended up wanting to cycle across Eurasia, from Bristol to Beijing. I was super interested in the Silk Roads. As you've heard, I'd spent some time in Russia. By that time, I'd spent some time in the Middle East. I really wanted to spend some more time in Central Asia, and I kind of wanted to connect all of these different places together. So going across Eurasia is what I sort of wanted to do. And I thought if I did it on a tandem bike, I can share this journey with other people. Because actually one of the things that being diagnosed with cancer had shown me, it was how much I cared about having my friends around me, and how important it was that sort of the experiences I had them with other people. And so I decided I'd do it on a tandem. And so my friends and my family joined, people on who I met on the road joined me. I had people from India and Uzbekistan and Romania, Germany, all over. People joined me. And that was one of the beautiful things about it. But the final group of people I really wanted to be able to join me were other people who had also been diagnosed with cancer. I call these group of people can livers, that you can live with cancer adventurously, fully, richly. But the idea of being a can liver is also to acknowledge what living with cancer actually means, which is that you face those challenges and those uncertainties. And I kind of came up with this term can liver as opposed to sort of the term cancer survivor, which gives this sort of sense of certainty that you've somehow survived, you've beaten cancer, that I just felt never applied to me, because as I explained already, I always felt it was going to almost certainly come back. And so, I set off on this journey on the 1st of January 2020. And with perfect timing, a few months later, COVID happened, which made things quite awkward. I had to stop the journey entirely for 5 months. And then it was really a bit of a big leap of faith when I restarted in August 2020 of whether I'd be able to get any further. But I managed in the end to get all the way to the border with China, which took me to April 2022. And then despite basically months of petitioning the Chinese government, they just wouldn't let me in because China was very, very strict about its borders. So I finished the journey rather than cycling through China to get to Beijing. I did the remaining distance, which was about 3,000 kilometers in London. And I got people to join me on the back of the tandem. I set it up on a turbo, and people joined me on Trafalgar Square, on the South Bank. We did like loads of cool events with different breweries and coffee shops, and so we still made it like a really joyous occasion that I think really finished the ride in exactly the spirit that I had started it.
It's an amazing story, and if that doesn't make for a good film, I don't know what does. Because again, it seems like life throws things at you, complications and twists and turns, and just as you're planning this bike ride, COVID hits, and then all of a sudden you've got more obstacles. But one thing that strikes me about you, Luke, is that and I don't think this is due to what happened with the diagnosis. I think you've probably got it ingrained in you, and I love people who are like this. It's, I'm going to find a way to do this. I'm not going to make this as an excuse not to do it. I'm going to still make it as an excuse to do it. I'm just going to find another way. And even at the end, it would have been easy to say, well, I got to China. But actually, no, I got to China, but I didn't get to Beijing. I'm going to finish it off in London, and we're going to make something special from it. And it creates even more special memories and connections with people who you may not have met before. So I think it's absolutely incredible, the story. And fortunately, I was able to follow it because of the connection to the charity, like I say. But maybe you just want to give a quick shout out, because I believe it was 2 charities you were raising money for at the time. I've obviously mentioned one, but wouldn't want the other one to go. Was it 4 in total?
Yeah. So we raised money for Move Against Cancer, which is, I just think, the most fantastic charity. And I obviously, I know Lucy very well, and through Lucy Gossage, know Gemma. It was the charity. I was looking at setting up a charity, and then I saw what Move and 5K Your Way did, and I was like, that's what I would do anyway. Like, that's charity I'd set up. So like, they've done it already. Let's just support Move, getting people moving through cancer, because that's basically, we didn't talk about it, but I think that's really what helped me most through treatment, was staying active, walking every day, bringing my bike into hospital. That probably was one of the biggest differences between me being here today and not at all. The other charities were Teenage Cancer Trust, Young Lives vs. Cancer, and Trekstock. And then we also supported charities, local charities on the routes that sort of usually had links to cancer or helping young people with cancer. So, charities in India or Pakistan or, World Child Cancer, which has like centers in Kosovo, for example. So, and the film A Life in Tandem is all about this expedition, and we should be coming to a film festival near you this autumn. We're applying for Banff and Kendal Mountain Festival, so your opportunity to see it in the UK will be Kendal Mountain Festival, we very much hope. So stay tuned for more news with that.
Amazing. Can't wait to see it. Absolutely incredible. So I guess we finally weaved our way all the way down the path back to the trail running. I can see here on your UTMB results, Luke, that you raced a 50-miler in Ireland in 2022. So would that have been kind of fairly soon after you finished the Bristol to Beijing project and finished that last section cycling on the turbo in London?
Yeah, it was. That was a really important race for me, because after the ride, I think in some ways I was a little bit lost, which is totally to be expected, I think, after doing something quite all-consuming. I also didn't really know how fit I was, particularly run fit. And so an American friend was coming over, and we both love running, so we decided we'd meet at a point where we could do a trail race, which turned out to be Bray, near Dublin in Ireland. And I just had no idea if I could run 80k. And I had no idea if I could run it very fast. I did have better nutrition this time, marginally. I think I'd made flapjacks for myself, which was sort of, and some, I really loved the gummy snakes on that race. I remember at about 50k in, there were some amazing gummy snakes. That's probably the highlight. But I did have some gels, so I was learning. I just remember after about 7 or 8k sort of feeling that, I want to run my own race. The pace right now isn't high enough. And it was with the lead group, so I just went off by myself. And I was like, I might pay for this. But I guess the sort of miracle is that I managed to keep a pretty high pace all the way through the race. And, I think I broke the course record by about an hour or something. And Owen, who does the commentary for UTMB, he's on the finish line. He was there on the finish line for that race. And, he was like, you should try mixing it with the big boys. You've got something. And I think that was a really important moment where I was like, okay, maybe this is something I could really see if I can be quite good at.
And was it the UTMB, well, CCC, but UTMB, the beast that it is, the World Finals, the Chamonix kind of week, that was immediately appealing? Was that the big one in your mind?
I think that's a short answer. I think that's the wrong way round. So I remember during that that race in Ireland, Eco Trail Wicklow, like I just loved it. Like every moment I was like, this is, what a privilege to be out by myself without any distractions, no phone. I'm in this beautiful nature, it's green rolling hills, like what would I rather be doing with one day of my life? Not would I want to do this every day, because I definitely wouldn't, but like there are so many days I think that we have that become very nondescript, right? Even if they're pleasant, you have coffee, you have brunch, like you read a book, whatever. But would you remember those days? They kind of blur into one. And I was like, this is a day that I know I'm never going to regret having done this. Like this very crystallized thought that, for 7 hours of this day, I've run in this beautiful place and I've had this like joyful experience, a very pure experience. And I suppose, that is what I really look for when I do these long distance trail runs. And so I guess CCC came about because that's sort of the pinnacle and the opportunity to run against some amazing runners. And, there's a very competitive side of me as well that loves to sort of, see if I can beat other people. But I think that the way round it went is like, I love this. I want to do more of the sport. And CCC is that at the highest level, but it wasn't the motivating factor, I suppose.
Yeah, no, cool. I get that. I mean, that's such a nice way of putting it. I couldn't agree more. It's a big part of it for me as well. Like I can completely relate to that. We talk about it a lot at RunThrough, to be honest, whether it's with the regular races or with the trail events that we put on, the kind of the why, the purpose, the core focus, like why are we getting out of bed? Why are we getting into vans first thing in the morning in the pissing rain in December, walking through muddy fields to set up marquees. Like, what are we doing? Why are we here? And it's a pretty clear why. Like, we're there to provide people with the opportunity to create these kind of life-changing moments, these like unforgettable memories, these experiences that they share with other people. You know, that finish line feeling, again, it's a cliched phrase, but for me, some of the most memorable moments of my life will be finishing races, whether they went well or poorly, that were a huge challenge that I had to kind of battle through. And yeah, I mean, it like gives me goosebumps thinking about it now. That's my whole reason for kind of racing as well. That plus a little bit of competition just to add to it. But yeah, no, I mean, I can completely relate to that. So where did that lead you next? Like, what was the next step? You won this race in Ireland. You thought, right, I'm got a bit of a feel for this, but also I just really enjoy it. What was the next kind of inspiration? What was the next location that you wanted to go and explore?
Yeah, well, then it sort of hit wintertime quite quickly, and sort of then I didn't do any trail racing for a little while until the next season. But then I was like really keen to, I guess, you know, see how I stacked up, you know. So I tried to basically enter as many races as possible. So I did like the Golden Trail National Series out in Ameland in Netherlands. That was the first Golden Trail National Series race there was on the UK calendar. So I was like, right, I'm going to do that. You know, I won that race. Then I did some more races. I did the Scaffold Sky race. I did the UTMB Istria 100K, or I started it. You know, and I was someone who's made loads of mistakes. I did that in a pair of fell shoes that, you know, had the sole or the thickness of a pound coin. Turns out it was quite rocky. I'd raced the Eco Trail Wicklow in those shoes and it'd been fine, just about. And I ended up having this huge bruise on my foot and wasn't able to walk after about 50K. So, you know, lots of mistakes along the way. But yeah, won the Scaffold Sky race, won UTMB Mozart 100, won what was it, Serpent Trail, which was also like a Golden Trail National Series race. You know, at this point I was like, oh, you know, I'm doing some cool stuff. You know, I'm winning a lot of races. I seem to be at this level. And maybe it's interesting that I think, you know, for a lot of athletes, you might be interested in how do you get sponsored and stuff. And I thought at that point, you know, like, you know, I'm going to have everyone queuing up to sort of, you know, like I'm going to have like my phone's going to be off the hook, you know, I'm just going to have people like ringing me. And it totally didn't work like that for me. I guess if you win UTMB on your debut, then yeah, it probably does work like that. But even when you win quite a few races that are relatively good, obviously they're not the most prestigious races. Yeah, you don't necessarily have people kind of like queuing up, and there's actually still a lot of hard work to reach out to people and to make yourself known, I think. Which is a bit of a surprise.
Yeah, it's a bit of a surprise for me too, but I think it's probably fair to say as well, the trail running world is catching up with the rest of the athletics world. Like if you were getting those same results in the track and field, well, certainly the marathon world, Luke, and winning some kind of what we class as the, I guess they're the more step down from the majors. We've got obviously the 6 majors, but then you've got other marathons around the world. And if you were winning them, you'd certainly be getting noticed. And I think the trail running world is starting to catch up. But you're right, I think there's still a lot of self-promotion that needs to go on. I mean, if I was a brand person with your story, I'd have been snapping you up, but then they don't know what they don't know, right? So they don't know your story. They're just seeing your results. So to you, they're just, or to them, you're just another runner who's winning races. So then once they get the story, they might then be able to, and use isn't the right word, but they certainly might be able to promote you as that inspirational character, because I think it's massive for a brand to have those stories. I think it's really important to have those personalities as well within brands. So it's great to see you with Brooks. Was it, I think I remember actually looking at your Instagram. I believe you signed with Brooks before CCC. If I remember rightly, I think you announced it the week of CCC. But the result at CCC, I mean, that must have been like for them, oh, well, we've got a bit of a golden nugget here. We've now got somebody on the podium at CCC with a top 10 finish.
Yeah, I think Brooks were very, very happy with that. Yeah, with that top 10 finish. You know, and it's funny how that came about. You know, that was after the UTMB Mozart 100 race. You know, I stayed afterwards in a hostel, and I got chatting to one of the people in my room who had also done the race, and we were sort of like, oh, what race did you do? And I was like, yeah, I did the 100K. And she was like, oh, didn't you win? And I was like, oh, yeah, I did win. And she's like, oh, I didn't realize the winners also stayed in hostels. It was quite funny. Turned out that, she worked for Brooks in their Netherlands office. And that's really, in terms of like getting noticed and the right people hearing, who then not only the right person hearing about it, but who knows the next person to talk to in the organization, so it goes through the channels, is a game changer, and how that came about.
I think it goes with one of my says, everything happens for a reason, right? If you don't book that hostel in Mozart, you don't meet that person, that sponsorship doesn't happen. I know it sounds crazy, but yeah, I sometimes think life is more interconnected than we think, but it's a great story. And the winnings obviously continued into 2024 as well. I know we're fast forwarding a bit here, but you had a great win recently as well. Val d'Aran, again, over 100K, I believe, and that looked like a really good performance. That came off the back of running at the Europeans in the same team as James, where you both represented Great Britain. So 2024 appears to be going well. But one thing I did notice on your socials, Luke, was quite an emotional post as well off the back of a recent race, in memory of, again, I think it was your brother who you lost, unfortunately, in the running kind of community as well, I believe. I wasn't aware of that, and I'm firstly really sorry to hear about that story, but it looks like he provides certainly a bit of inspiration for you when you're out on those trails and getting these wins.
Yeah, so I mentioned John right at the beginning of this podcast. He was 18 months older than me. We were brothers, just the two of us. And through his uni, they spent like a week doing a sort of hare and hounds kind of game up in the Lake District. So 3 or 4 people would be a hare and they'd have a horn, and everyone else would chase after them, as a sort of bit of, just as like a fun game, basically. And John had been doing this for quite a few years. And just as I was starting my first round of chemotherapy, so we're back in 2018, he went up as usual to do the hunt. And we don't really know what happened. But somehow at some point, John was on quite a bit of steep hillside, somehow fell, and in just an incredibly unfortunate way must have fell quite a long way and hit his head in a really, really bad way, and died very, very quickly afterwards, which, yeah, it's about as shit as it sounds, really. And particularly for my parents, and so I think, anytime I'm in a race and I'm feeling it's a bit hard work, I really do think that, John would do anything to be alive right now, and you'd trade anything to be in a huge amount of pain in the mountains just to be alive. And so that is something I'm very aware of, particularly on those days in the mountains. And Val d'Aran was the sort of 6-year anniversary of John's death, so it happened on a really really poignant day.
Well, I'm sure he's looking down with you with immense pride when you're out on those trails. And I know you're obviously thinking of him whilst you're out there. And again, thanks for sharing that, Luke. You mentioned at the start, before we came on, about being very open and honest about your story. And thank you for that, because it's not easy to obviously talk about these emotional episodes that happen. And you seem to have had a few that have had a huge impact on your life. But again, what I find amazing about you and your character is you still find positives around these, and you're so positive when you talk about it. Your post that you put out on social media was again so positive, despite it being, as you say, quite a crappy situation, especially for yourself and your parents. So yeah, thanks again for sharing that, and I'm sure he will inspire you to go on and achieve great things, and yourself as an inspiration. I guess touching back on the trails before we go on to the book, because we've not actually mentioned the book, even though we've mentioned the potential film airing later on this year, and hopefully we all get to see that, because it sounds amazing. What are the plans for the rest of 2024 then? Are we going to see you back at CCC? Is that the plan?
Yeah. I'll come on to that. Just to, I guess, finish talking about John, in that I think I feel it's really important to talk about John, because it's very easy for people to hear my story and say, well, this guy was diagnosed with cancer, and
Yeah.
he needs to, it makes sense for him to go off and live his dream, because he it seemed like he was going to be dead in a few years. And I think for me, it's really important to share John's story, because it really brings home the fact that actually none of us really know how long that we have. And, yes, the chances of any one of us dying by a freak accident are pretty small. But, it could happen. And also, what's the worst that could happen if you start living your dream, going for things that really matter? What are the small changes that you can make? The worst that can happen is you're going a bit closer to a life that you really enjoy. And I know, James, you've made huge changes in your life over the last few years that have totally changed the way that you live. And sometimes it seems like there's a big risk, but also often what's the downside of doing something that you want to be doing? I don't know, maybe you've got some thoughts on that, and then we can return to the rest of 2024.
What a message that is. I'm going to hand over to James, because we talk about it a lot. But yeah, go on, James. That's a great message, Luke.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, it's difficult not to see, irony is not the right word, but I imagine probably some feelings of unfairness and stuff associated with that as well, that you've had this diagnosis, you've had this kind of news of, look, you are going to die, you have limited time, do with it what you will, but this is something that we're pretty sure is going to happen. All of a sudden then, for your brother, who theoretically has no reason to think about that, to kind of have this completely by surprise kind of freak accident situation, and like you say, that your parents having to go through both of those things at the same time, I can't even imagine how that must have been. But yeah, I mean, for you to not come out of it with this thought process of, why would you not take risks to make sure that you're living life to the full? Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Nobody really cares. It's not going to last that long. And you can't really fuck it up to the point where it's irreversible and you can just come back and start again. It doesn't really make any difference. I think a lot of people do just get into a track of things have been going quite well and they've been quite predictable for a long time. And that makes it really scary to make a big change. But I think, for you, these nothing really stacks up to your experiences. But for me, it was a lot of traveling and changes in lifestyle and changes in kind of mindset that made me realize, actually, you can take a risk. You can move overseas. You can quit your job and do something completely new. You can take on a brand new sport at a later point in life and kind of roll these dice and take these gambles. And even if it doesn't work out, it doesn't matter. It's literally fine. It's just a scary step to initially take, isn't it? And for you, I guess all that fear is taken away, because what is there left to be scared of? It couldn't get any worse at that point for you.
Yeah, I think it's well put. I think it's very well put, James. Yeah.
Wasn't really a question.
I'm just going to add to that. Yeah. I'm going to add to it, because I think it's really well put. And I think sometimes we're guilty, and people listening in here will be guilty of it as well, where we get caught in this merry-go-round that is life, work, life, and we sometimes forget about those closest to us, and we forget that we have dreams and aspirations, and they can disappear very, very quickly. But I think for me personally, I sometimes have to remind myself of Gemma's situation and think back to that time when we were in hospital, and I thought, life is too short. Let's just go for it. Let's just move to London and see what happens down there. And then, when she said, I'm quitting my job at Nike to set up a charity, and all the family are like, what? You're quitting your job at Nike to form a charity that doesn't even exist? Yeah, why not? As you just said, James, what have you got to lose? Sometimes we've got a lot to lose, but a lot of people don't look at what they've got to gain. And I would strongly suggest people look at what is there to gain from this as well. And whether that's going on a bike and cycling around the world and raising a heck of a lot of awareness for some brilliant causes, by the way, as well as some money and meeting some wonderful people and getting to do what you want to do, your dream of traveling the world, then why not? Because what else would you be doing? So yeah, sometimes we need an excuse to do it, as you quite rightly pointed out, Luke. But sometimes people are looking for that excuse. And the worst saying in the world is, oh, you know what, I'll save it for another time. I know I'll get to do it, but I'll do it in the new year, or I'll do it when it comes out. No, just do it now. Just do it. Why not? Not to nick Nike's slogan then.
I was going to say, the irony of quitting
the
Nike career and then using the slogan in your motivational speech is not lost on us. So, I mean, all right, well, moving on from that, I mean, clearly running is just a small part of your life, Luke. And I know you're, like you say, you like to have a lot of things going on, right? You're teaching, you've been working on this movie, on the documentary, you've been writing the book, you've been traveling the world racing, you're staying with friends in Kazakhstan. I'm sure you've probably got a million other things going on that we've not even touched on. But with regards to the running side of things and the goals for this year, your plan is to go back to UTMB, right? Is it CCC again this August? And
Yep.
Why return to that race other than probably a level of sponsorship obligation? But for you as a person, because you don't really seem like someone who does stuff that they don't want to do, why go back and do that race again?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's. I mean, ultimately, there's definitely a bit that says like there's unfinished business. I mean, it's a beautiful race. You know, the scenery is beautiful. The running is beautiful. You know, it's quick trails. I now have increasing numbers like of friends in the trail world, and so you know, it's a glorious race to do. And I love the 100K distance. For me, it feels like a bit of a sweet spot. But yeah, like whilst my aim is to, you know, on the day will be to, you know, run my best, but just really enjoy where I am, you know, and just the experience, you know, and then, you know, the result of my training and as I'm able to perform on the day will dictate the final result, right? You know, I'll do whatever I can, but I can't really control what happens. But, you know, when I look at what I was doing to train last year and I look at what I do to train this year, I hope that gives room for, you know, potential for going a lot quicker, regardless of maybe everyone else is going to go a lot quicker too, and then that's fine. But I hope I could go a lot quicker than last year, and that will be satisfying.
Yeah, I mean,
I love the fact you focus on those processes as well, Luke. Sorry, James, go ahead. I love that process driven. Yeah,
no, you're all good. Like it's because we talk about this all the time, right? You can only run the race that you can race, and placements are definitely dictated by the strength of the field and the other people around you. But in terms of just recent form and fitness, and I know Lewis touched on the Val d'Aran event that you won recently, but like, I mean, I saw that pop up and I went back and looked at the splits and the depth of the field and the course and stuff, and to me that really jumped out as like standout performance. Did you feel good? I'm assuming you did. It seemed like an incredible result, just time wise and the people you beat. You're in pretty good form at the moment, I would say.
Yeah, I had fun.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's a race that, you know, I mean, you know, it's really interesting, James, because, you know, we did the European Championships together, you know, and I felt I had my ass handed to me. You know, I like, you know, that this is a sport that also absolutely puts you in your place when you're either not in the shape that you need to be, or you make a mistake. You know, you fall, you twist an ankle, your nutrition's bad, you know, you screw up your, you know, eating the night before or the day before, you know, and so it can be a very humbling experience. And like, certainly I found like European Championships to be like, you know, like I got smashed big time by a lot of people. And so I guess, you know, it made me treat the Val d'Aran race with a lot more respect. You know, 160K in the European Championships felt like a long way. And I went into this race thinking like 110K, like, that's really, really long way. Can I still do this? You know, I was very much thinking like, do I still have it in me to race this far at this level? And I think the glorious thing when you start a race is you're just in that moment. And I remember, you know, that very first climb being like, everyone seems to not be going as fast as I'd like to be running. Like, who cares? I'll deal with kilometer 60 or kilometer 70 when that rolls around. But right now my legs feel good. Let's try and stamp my mark on this race. And I'd rather try and win this race than say, oh, I'm going to try and come top 5. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me at all, you know, like, and it ended up being a really, really good race. It was tough. I remember at 40K thinking it was getting really hot. You know, I was like, have I blown this? You know, have I overcooked it? You know, but I think there's this really amazing point that you get to sort of 60 or 70K and you just have to hang in there. And enjoy that bit of the race, because it's no longer the sexy bit of the race where you've got sexy speed. I remember reading that, see someone's like comment, you got sexy speed and then you got your real speed when you're kind of a bit whacked already. Yeah, I don't know. It was really nice to be able to pull off that performance. And I started working with David Roach, who I just love his positivity. He's a coach out in the US. I love his positivity. And also, I guess it gives me the license to train harder and also less hard as well, if that makes sense. Before that, I was trying to constantly do like double days. I was constantly thinking about how many miles I should be doing. And I got injured quite a bit. And with David, I think there's probably a lot more focus, but also like, a rest day is truly a rest day. And I'm not looking over my shoulder thinking, do I actually want to slip in a cheeky 10K or something?
Well, I'm excited to see what you can do this year, Luke, because as a coach, I think one thing that can improve people, particularly finding out about your nutrition strategies in the past with chocolate bars and long snakes and things like that. It seems like you're in good hands with David, and I'm sure like just having that eye on you, even though we know a lot as athletes and we do learn as we go, I just think having that guidance from somebody is super important. And the results speak for themselves, right? That was an awesome run, the last one out. But back to the original question around why wouldn't you want to go back to CCC? Like, who wouldn't want a helicopter following them again in the mountains? Like, why wouldn't you want to go back there and be leading out CCC? We will be out there to watch you. James is obviously going in the OCC, which is the day before. We'll be out on course for the CCC. I can't wait to go out there and watch you out there. And I love the fact you're saying, you know what, I'm just going to go there and enjoy it and try and be better than I was last year. Maybe implement these processes and let's see what happens. But yeah, for those of them who aren't aware, obviously a lot of this is aimed at the RunThrough Trails audience. How can they follow that race, Luke? How can they follow you and your progress and James's that week so that they get a real feel for what you're doing and what you're going through?
Yeah, so if anybody wants to follow me and that race, then probably Instagram is the best place, which you'll be able to find out my race number to make it easier to track me. But my Instagram is at Luke G. Shaw. It's a bit less of a mouthful than Luke Grenfell-Shaw. So yeah, at Luke G. Shaw on Instagram is probably the best place to follow. And there'll also be like updates on, what is happening with the film, when that's going to be shown, where it's going to be shown, and also like updates on the book. So yeah, that would be the best place to follow. And you can always like heckle me with, anything you want to heckle me with as well.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I mean, I for one can't wait to get out there. I mean, you mentioned earlier one of the reasons why you'd want to go back to CCC is all of the people that you've met through the sport and on your travels and raced against and whatever. Are going to be there, right? It's like the center of the world for that week. And that's a huge appeal to me as well. I feel like everyone that I've been speaking to recently is racing or going to take photos or going to spectate or being involved in some way. It just draws everybody in. So yeah, I'm just excited to see you. Excited to see everybody. Hopefully I've got the legs to get out on the course and cheer you on. If not, I will be at the finish line, getting the train into town, limping around. But yeah, no, we'll definitely touch base post race, mate. And yeah, wish you all the best in what have we got now? Like it's scarily close, a month. We're literally looking at 4 weeks, aren't we?
Yeah.
Jesus. Yeah. Wish
my top tip for the race, I would keep an eye on Baptiste Le Petitjean. He came 9th behind me last year, one place behind me, and then also second behind me at Mozart 100. We're now like super good friends, and this is talking about friends that make through the sport. Like he's such a talented runner. He came 3rd at Marathon du Mont Blanc 90K this year. So like keep an eye on Baptiste Le Petitjean. Like he's such a nice guy. So when you see him out on the course, give him a big cheer.
You got a bit of a rivalry going then. So you're 2-0 against him? Is that what we're saying?
Well, not that we're counting.
Okay.
But,
we'll see how he gets on. All right, mate. Amazing.
He's super nice guy. He's such a nice guy. So, I really want to. I'd be so happy to see him do super, super well.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think that's a beautiful note to finish on. So let's call it a day there. As I said, we'll be sharing in the bio of the podcast links to all of your socials. And the cycling and the documentary and any information about the book. And obviously, as always, mate, we'd love to have you back one day to talk about how CCC goes. But yeah, for now, good luck with the next few weeks of training. Don't do too much. Do what David tells you. And like I say, we'll meet up for a beer after the race. But yeah, thanks so much for your time, mate. This has been incredible. Probably my favorite episode that we've done so far. Mega inspirational. And I've got a little steady run to go and do. So I'm going to enjoy that. And yeah, hope you've enjoyed the conversation.
Amazing episode.
Well, thanks very much, guys. James, good luck at OCC. And yeah, I'll see you, Lewis, there, and Gemma as well. Looking forward to it.
See you in France.
Awesome. All right. Cheers, guys. See you later.